But let's speculate again. Okay, newest, most modern weaponry, Western weaponry, finally delivered to Ukraine. Russian planes and missiles are shot down faster and in a greater quantity. What diplomatic or political repercussions can be expected in this case in the world? If any, maybe this is the way to stop the war, to deliver more weaponry. Is it not obvious to people in the West?
I fully agree with you. I think that, there's greatest mistake, and when history writes about this war, the fact that the White House took so long to make the decision to send weaponry over, what would go down as one of the greatest errors. I mean, Russia had, I think it was an estimated 140,000 troops when it initially invaded Ukraine. Today it has over 400,000 inside of Ukraine. They've obviously been able to mine the borders of the front line of the war. And that mining is going to take time to pick up for Ukraine to be able to advance. But the U.S. has only sent 15% of the demining equipment, which it has promised. So it's obviously going to slow things down. So, I think it's sort of talking out both sides of their mouths, and I can say as an American, that American authorities say, why are things moving faster, at the same time saying, but we're not going to give you the tools necessary for you to be able to move faster. So it's a bit unjust and unwise. I think the fastest and the best way that Ukraine can win is by it receiving all the weaponry it needs now and defense technologies so that it can have a decisive victory over Russia.
I vote for you as American president. I like your program. I like your stance. Well, the Air Force spokesman, Yuri Ignat, reported that Ukraine will lease a number of air defense systems, but did not name the countries, nothing more. But I believe this is a fine move, both politically and militarily. Do you agree?
Of course. I mean, the fact is, this is something that Ukraine needed to do, and it's good that it's happening. The more that Ukraine gets in the country now, however it gets in the country now, is important. And the fact that it's leasing, I think, is a wise decision because, one, it doesn't need these weaponry in the long term after the war. But secondly, this is something that it shows that there's a buy-in on the side of Ukraine. I think that it's important that Western audiences see that Ukraine is not just the recipient of goodwill, but rather somebody who's purchasing its own ability to defend itself.
What do you think is the biggest domestic, and what is you think the biggest international problem to solve for the United States of America at the moment?
At this point, we are facing an incredibly complicated situation with this axis of countries that are truly evil between Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela, and I think, unfortunately, China is in there too. And these dictatorships are working together. They're working to unseat democratically elected governments around the world. And they're obviously waging war in the Middle East as they are in Ukraine and what might soon be in Taiwan. Venezuela itself, we don't think about it because it's far away from Ukraine, but Venezuela is talking about taking over a neighboring country right now. There is a lot going on, and it's a very dangerous world. And it's unfortunately just several small countries plus China that are in charge of all of this. And we should have done much more years ago to stop that and to prevent the rise of Putin's global empire.
Well, I just wonder if you see it from your perspective, from your point of view. Do you think Russia will attack critical infrastructure this winter in Ukraine?
I have no doubt that Russia will seek to attack critical infrastructure. And the fact is that it's become much easier than it was before. It's become cheaper. I mean, before it was missile strikes, which are more expensive, more complicated. But at this point, it seems that Russia is receiving missilery from Iran, or it will be shortly. It's obviously receiving technological assistance from North Korea as well. So before Russia was running out of things like missiles, at this point they're going to have more. But second to that is that they've advanced dramatically in the past year over the use of drones. Drones can be used in so many different ways. And so I think this is going to be increasingly complicated to defend Ukraine.
Well, I just wonder, how can you evaluate the progress of the counterattack? Because I hear voices all the time, Mr. Smart, like Ukrainian counteroffensive is not fast. It's not fast enough. I don't know what's enough for you to sitting on your sofa, but I mean, it's not enough. But what do you think? What's the progress without any air superiority, or sometimes without any air at all? Any progress for Ukrainian counteroffensive?
Sure. I mean, we have to remember that the counteroffensive is more than just a line of battle. The counteroffensive is also what's going on in the seas, what's going on in the air, what's going on the internet, I mean, the cyberspace, but as well as space itself. And so there are advances in these areas as well. I mean, is Russia generally more degraded now than it was before? And the answer is yes, clearly it is. So if we look at it as a whole thing, a holistic approach to understanding where is the Russian Federation now versus at the beginning of the counteroffensive, Russia is not in a better place. Ukraine is truly gaining from what is going on right now. And so I think that those who are criticizing counteroffensive, I think they have too much of a, I don't know, idealized view of how warfare works, where, there's just going to storm across the plain and take eastern Ukraine. It historically doesn't really work like that. Historically, you get in these situations like Ukraine is now, it's less exciting to see, no big breakthroughs, but progress is being made. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
It's not, I mean, there's the people are expecting, a Hollywood movie show that, well, there's illusion he's playing, he's the main character, and he just waves the flag, and here we go, here's the victory. But for some reason, it is not happening, and the reason is the hesitation of the Western world, I believe, very much. It is so. But let us speculate even deeper in all that. If all the weapons requested by the leadership of Ukraine, have been delivered in time, would the results on the counteroffensive have been more successful? Do you think that the war could be over at the moment, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Had the West sent more weaponry to Ukraine faster, undoubtedly Ukraine would have had greater successes at this point.
Right.
There is clearly a lack of various types of weaponry, as we all know, and that's something that continues to drag on and on. And unfortunately, I think that this deadlock in Congress in regards to financing for Ukraine is something that is certainly not helping. 96% of funds that were allocated for Ukraine have been used already. 96%. We're down to very little left. And that's a worrisome sign. And, there's not much we can do to influence Congress. You have to sit and wait. But there is something that I think is a lesson learned here, which is the more we drag our feet, the more it costs us both materially as well as time, as well as lives in the long term. The wisest thing we can do is send as much assistance as quickly as possible so that Ukraine can finally defeat Russia.
Yeah, as well as lives, right. So does the Russian army have enough weapons at the moment?
The Russian army seems that it does have sufficient numbers of a lot of the weaponry that it needs. That being said, I think that Russia is going to suffer from other problems. It continues to suffer from a lot of problems. And one of those is with personnel. The lack of trained persons that they have in their military is increasing. I mean, it's always been a stable number of people who they pulled out of prison or out of hospitals, or other people who received minimal to no training before they're being sent off as cannon fodder. And that's going to continue. But that's something that also creates problems, because without some sort of a trained soldiery, you're going to continue to deal with people who really don't know what they're doing. There's going to be higher discontent in the military. We see high discontent in the Russian military. And that is something that I think is actually probably one of the best things going on right now, is the fact that the Russian soldiers themselves are not very happy. And that's something that counts against leadership in the country.
Yeah, there are about like 300,000 of them are like dead, and everyone knows it. But it seems to me that Russian society is getting okay with that. I mean, whatever. I mean, we're Russians. We're that great enough. We have a great Russian culture, whatever, Dostoevsky, Nabokov. We can, have some sex and have more people. Maybe that's what they are thinking. And because some discontent, yes. But I don't see that really the big changes in a Russian society as a society that can influence the power, that should influence the power, that should have an impact, direct impact on the power. Do you believe there are some changes in Russia even possible after the war, after the Ukraine wins?
Well, I mean, ultimately, listen, this war can only end when Russia decides it to end, because Russia could continue attacking Ukraine. Even if every soldier of Russia was forced out of Ukraine, Russia could continue to just bomb Ukraine for the next 20 years. And as long as it's doing missile strikes regularly on Odessa and Boryspil airport, there's no international trade, all international traffic dies, and there's going to be no rebuilding the country. So Russia needs to have change, fundamentally, if there's going to be any hope. But I think that will happen. And the reason I think it will happen is not because the Russian population changes, because you're right, they don't change. I agree with you totally. But they don't really matter, because as we know in Russian history, the people, the peasants, the serfs, have never really mattered to the Tsar. What's going to actually matter and what changes things is when there's a military coup, for instance. And when we look at what happened in Rostov with Prigozhin, this was a huge step in that direction. We see that there's a significant instability. Look at the head of the military of India, one of the largest militaries in the world. What did he say? He said that we no longer view Russia to be a strategic partner, because what we saw go on with Prigozhin showed that there's too much insubordination and instability of the Russian military and the Russian state. We look at the senior leadership of the Russian government when Prigozhin did that. The ministers, even Patriarch Kirill, you look at what was going on with the officers that he encountered in Rostov, nobody confronted him. And the reason is simple. They weren't sure if he might win. So we see there is political instability in the Russian government. And when we talk about the mass of soldiers, I agree. I mean, what they think or do not think doesn't really matter. But the day that they try to seize power, which could happen, or just not obey their officers or kill their officers, which has happened before in Russian history, then this would be something that could be a significant shift into what is occurring.
Okay, well, shift happens. Shift happens. That sounds good, right? Shift happened. So someone else, not Putin. What else?
So, it's going to be really hard. It depends, but it'll probably be someone from the oligarchical class, we could assume. It will not be someone, I think, in the close political leadership. I mean, someone like a Shogu, who's completely reliant on Putin as his patron, would,
Right.
I mean, I think he'll end up dead pretty quick. And so will a lot of the other people. But whoever it is that comes to power, I'm pretty sure it would end the war quickly. And the reason is very simple. If you come to power illegitimately, sorry, the biggest problem you're going to face is that people do not recognize you as the actual leader of the country. So the way you get around that is to gain legitimacy. And the way you gain legitimacy, there's several ways, but one of the ways is you gain international recognition. And to gain international recognition from the West, especially from the United States, controlling the nuclear arsenal is probably the most important thing. And the second most important thing is probably that you are able to assure the West that you're not going to be a threat to them any longer. And that includes pulling out of Ukraine. And I think any oligarch who were to come to power values his money and his power more than he values a distant war in Ukraine and would probably be willing to make that deal.